Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Bold and Beautiful. Today, Steffy Forrester Finnegan is being unfair to hire Dylan after she fired Deke Sharp. Steffy Forrester Finnegan fired Deke Sharp. Now she has money to hire Dylan. This is weird because Steffy Forrester Finnegan did not have money to keep Deke Sharp. Deke Sharp went to school to learn about design. He wants to work in fashion. Deke Sharp made a book of his drawings. Showed it to people without telling them it was his. Everyone liked the drawings that Deke Sharp did. Deke needs a little experience before he can really make a name for himself in the industry, but people are always talking about how talented Deke is. Deke has the potential to be a star in the fashion business. Deke is very good at what he does. Unfortunately, that was not enough for Deke to keep his job at Forrester Creations. When Thomas Forrester wanted to work on Hope Logan Spencer's line, Deke was let go. Thomas Forrester made the decision and Deke was out of a job. Deke did not get to stay at Forrester Creations because Thomas Forrester wanted to work with Hope Logan Spencer. Thomas and Zende Forrester Dominguez told Hope for the future that they could take care of things without Deke. So Steffy made Hope fire Deke. Hope thought that maybe they could still find a place for Deke. Steffy said no way, they could not pay someone who was not needed. Steffy had a change of heart when Electra Forrester and Will Spencer came to her asking for help to find a job for Dylan. Steffy really wants to help Dylan, so she is willing to talk to Rich Forrester about giving Dylan a job. If everything works out, Dylan will soon be working for the Forrester Company. This is interesting because Steffy did not think Dylan was needed before. Now she is trying to get her a job at the company anyway. Steffy is doing this for Dylan. It seems weird that Deke had to make such a deal. About Hope's line, why could he not find a middle ground? Steffy is trying to help Dylan get a job at Forrester. Deke could have just stayed at Forrester Creations as a fashion designer. They seem to have some money. Dylan is an artist. That is great, but Forrester Creations is a fashion company. Dylan does not know much about fashion. Deke knows a lot about fashion. Would be very helpful to Forrester Creations. Steffy wants to help her friend Dylan. That is nice of Steffy. It does not make sense to get rid of Deke and then hire Dylan. They said they did not have money for Deke. Now they have money for Dylan. It seems like a thing to do. Forrester Creations needs people who know about fashion, like Deke. It's obvious that B&B wanted Deke over at Logan while Dylan presumably causes issues for Electra and Will at Forrester. So Steffy's decision-making has to fit whether it makes sense or not. Electra Forrester is in a lot of trouble for bullying homeless Dylan. Electra Forrester should be really happy on the Bold and the Beautiful. She has a bad feeling that homeless Dylan is trying to take her boyfriend away from her. Electra Forrester and her boyfriend were able to get through some things with Looney Luna, but now Electra Forrester is worried that homeless Dylan is going to ruin everything. Homeless Dylan is an art teacher who does not have a job and lives in her car. Electra Forrester has every right to be worried about homeless Dylan and Will Spencer Jr. The question is, will Electra Forrester do something crazy to stop homeless Dylan? Here is what is coming up next on Bold and the Beautiful. Spoilers are below. Electra knows what is coming next. Week at Forrester Creations. Spoilers say Dylan will arrive for her first day of work at Forrester Creations. Steffy Forrester has taken Dylan, who's Hayes' art teacher, under her wing and found her a position at the Forrester Creations office. It is no secret that Electra Forrester looks up to Steffy Forrester and has always tried to impress Steffy Forrester at Forrester Creations. Things are going to get really bad when Dylan shows up out of nowhere and becomes Steffy's student. Electra Forrester is always so nice and polite. She has been like that since she came to the Bold and the Beautiful. Remy Price even followed her to Los Angeles because he thought she was perfect. There is another side to Electra Forrester that we do not know about yet. What happens when Electra Forrester does not get what she wants? Electra is getting really worried because Dylan is moving into Will's guest house. Dylan is trying to take Electra's boyfriend from her. Now Dylan is also trying to take Electra's job. Electra will not just sit back. Let Dylan take over her life. The Bold and Beautiful. Spoilers say that Electra will soon talk to her boyfriend about his roommate Dylan. Electra is not going to let Dylan get away with this. She will make sure that Dylan knows that Electra is not happy about her moving. The Bold and Beautiful. Spoilers say it will not take long for Electra to confront Dylan about what she's doing. Electra will confront her boyfriend about Dylan too. Will horrified by Electra's behavior if someone overhears Electra threatening a homeless girl with no family and not a dime to her name, it's going to look horrible. Even worse, Will Spencer's going to be appalled that his girlfriend is bullying someone who is already down on their luck. Is Electra right to be worried about Dylan stealing her life, or is she just being paranoid? Is Dylan going to break up Electra and Will Spencer? The news of Dylan's hiring spreads through Forrester creations like wildfire, igniting whispers in every corridor and stunned silences in every design room. Because just days ago Steffy stood before the staff and coldly explained that Deke's position had to be eliminated due to budget constraints. Yet now she is smiling beside a polished newcomer with a resume that screams expense, and no one feels that betrayal more sharply than Deke himself, who watches from the lobby as Dylan is escorted. Upstairs, his cardboard box still in his arms, his future reduced to folded sketches and broken dreams, and when he confronts Hope in the hallway with trembling disbelief, asking how the company could suddenly afford fresh blood when they couldn't afford loyalty, Hope has no answer except the ache in her chest and the sinking realization that Steffy's leadership may be drifting into dangerous territory, because this isn't just about money, it's about power, optics, and who gets to matter at Forrester. And when Ridge learns the truth during a tense executive meeting, his jaw tightens as he scans the financial projections that Steffy approved overnight. Seeing the numbers don't lie, but the story behind them does, because the funds were always there, merely reallocated, and Brooke senses the storm building in him the way only she can, whispering that this feels personal, and she's right, because Dylan isn't just any hire, he's ambitious, charming, and dangerously aligned with Steffy's vision, a living declaration that the company is entering a new era, one that leaves casualties behind. And while Steffy insists this is about innovation and momentum, Finn begins to see the cost in her eyes, the subtle hardening that comes when leadership becomes survival. And as Deke finally stands before Steffy in her office, voice cracking but resolute, demanding to know why his loyalty meant nothing, Steffy's composed mask falters for half a second before she delivers a corporate perfect answer about evolution and forward motion. Yet he doesn't leave until he says the words that echo through her mind long after the door closes, that fairness isn't weakness and that someday she'll realize she fired more than an employee, she fired trust. And those words haunt her even as Dylan praises her boldness, even as the board applauds her decisiveness, even as the press frames her as fearless, because beneath the praise lies a growing fracture between legacy and leadership, between family and ambition. And when Hope finally confronts her in the design room, surrounded by mannequins dressed in dreams, asking if Forrester is still a place for heart or only for strategy, Steffy answers with a question of her own, whether heart can survive without victory. And that moment becomes the silent line dividing the company into those who believe in compassion and those who believe in conquest, while Deke walks into an uncertain future carrying the proof that loyalty is no longer currency at Forrester Creations. And somewhere deep inside Steffy, a voice whispers that this decision may define her reign, not as the leader who saved the company, but as the woman who proved that fairness has a price, and she was willing to pay it with someone else's future. As the fallout deepens, Forrester Creations becomes a battlefield of quiet resentment and strategic smiles, because while Dylan dazzles the design team with bold concepts and fast-talking confidence, every sketch he pins to the board feels like another reminder of the man who was erased to make room for him. And the staff can't help but compare the warmth Deke brought to the room with the sleek ambition Dylan now radiates, an ambition that mirrors Steffy's own, and that reflection both empowers and unsettles her, especially when Ridge finally confronts her in private, his voice sharp with disappointment rather than anger, telling her that leadership isn't just about numbers, it's about legacy, and she fires back that legacy doesn't pay salaries, that survival in fashion is ruthless, and that she refuses to let sentimentality sink a company her children may one day inherit. Yet Ridge counters with a truth she cannot ignore, that Forrester was built on vision and humanity, and stripping one from the other turns innovation into intimidation. And while this argument reverberates through the walls, Hope finds herself cornered by employees seeking reassurance, their eyes pleading for proof that loyalty still matters, and she realizes that Steffy's choice has created an invisible hierarchy, one where fear quietly replaces faith. And when Finn witnesses Steffy brush off concerns with executive calm, he begins to question whether the woman he loves is being consumed by the very power she wields, because every time she justifies the decision, her voice grows steadier and her heart grows further away, and even Liam, watching from the sidelines, senses that something fundamental is shifting, that Steffy is no longer fighting for balance but for dominance. And this shift reaches a breaking point when a reporter corners Steffy about the optics of firing a loyal designer only to hire a costly outsider, forcing her to defend a narrative that feels thinner every time it's spoken. And though she delivers a flawless public response, privately the words Deke said echo louder, because she knows the staff saw him leave, saw the box in his arms, saw the contradiction, and in a late-night moment alone in her office, surrounded by the city's glow and the weight of expectation, Steffy finally allows herself to feel the doubt she's buried, wondering whether leadership has turned her into someone she once swore she'd never become. Yet even in that vulnerability, resolve wins. Because she believes that hesitation is a luxury she can't afford, and when Dylan presents a daring collection concept that promises headlines and revenue, she embraces it like proof that she was right, even as Hope watches with quiet sorrow, realizing that Forrester is being reshaped not just in fabric but in philosophy, and somewhere beyond those glass walls, Deke begins sketching again, fueled by betrayal rather than security, unknowingly becoming the living consequence of Steffy's choice. Because the company may thrive, the numbers may climb, and the headlines may praise her, but every success will now carry the shadow of the man who was sacrificed, and the question will linger in every heart. Was this evolution, or was it the moment Forrester Creations lost its soul? Steffy stood frozen in the doorway of her office long after Dylan left, her heart still pounding from the revelation he had dropped like a bomb between them, because in that single, trembling confession, about his mother's brief, secret affair with Jack Finnegan years ago, she had suddenly seen her own past refracted in his eyes, the same confusion, the same longing, the same desperate need to belong that had haunted her ever since she learned the truth about her own biological father, and it was that shared wound that finally pushed her over the edge and made her decision irreversible, because when she called him back and told him, "You're hired," it wasn't just a business move, it was an act of empathy, a promise that someone who had once been lost in the shadows would now have a place in the light. And from that moment forward the entire building seemed to hum with a new energy as Dylan walked through Forrester Creations no longer as a stranger but as someone with purpose, even as whispers followed him down the hallway, employees trading looks, wondering why Steffy Forrester would take such a risk on someone with no pedigree, no famous last name, and a past wrapped in mystery, while Steffy herself felt the familiar weight of judgment pressing in on her shoulders, reminding her of every time her own lineage had been scrutinized, every time she had felt like an outsider in the very family whose name she carried, and yet instead of shrinking, she straightened, because this time she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for him too, and that gave her strength she hadn't known she still possessed. Across the room, Ridge sensed the shift before he even understood it, catching a glimpse of Dylan's reflection in the glass and recognizing in the young man's posture a raw hunger that mirrored his own at that age, which unsettled him deeply, because Ridge had spent years wrestling with what it meant to be a Forrester, with what it meant to learn late in life that Eric was not his biological father, and now here was Steffy, unknowingly reopening old wounds by bringing another lost soul into their orbit, and when he confronted her, his voice carried both concern and a father's instinct to protect, but Steffy met him head-on, telling him that Dylan deserved a chance, that talent should matter more than blood, that maybe if someone had done this for her when she was younger, she wouldn't have spent so many years feeling like she had to prove she belonged, and Ridge heard in her words not defiance but vulnerability, which silenced him more effectively than any argument ever could, because he realized she wasn't just making a statement about business, she was making one about identity, about the kind of world she wanted to build, and in that moment, Ridge saw his daughter not as the impulsive girl she once was but as a leader shaped by pain and growth, even as Taylor, watching from the hallway, felt her own heart tighten, because she too remembered the terror of learning truths that rearranged everything, and she wondered if Steffy was unconsciously trying to heal herself by saving someone else, a noble impulse but one that could easily backfire in a family where secrets had a way of exploding at the worst possible time. Meanwhile, Dylan sat at his new desk, hands trembling as he touched the smooth surface, the Forrester logo gleaming nearby like a promise he was afraid to believe, because all his life he had existed on the edges, always watching others belong, always wondering where he fit, and now, because one woman saw herself in him, he had been given a chance that felt almost unreal, and yet with that gratitude came fear, because if Jack really was his father, then this place wasn't just a workplace, it was a minefield of connections and consequences he barely understood, and every smile from a coworker felt like both welcome and warning. every compliment like a test he might fail, especially when Finn appeared in the doorway, curiosity written all over his face, because Finn, too, carried Jack's blood, and though neither man knew it yet, destiny had already begun to weave their paths together, drawing them closer with invisible threads that would soon tighten, as Finn sensed something familiar in Dylan's eyes, something that stirred an unease he couldn't name, prompting polite conversation that lingered a little too long, glances that held a fraction too much recognition, as if two mirrors were quietly acknowledging one another, and Steffy watched them from across the room with a strange flutter in her chest, unable to explain why she suddenly felt as though she had set something enormous in motion, something far beyond a simple hire, because the Forrester world had always been a place where bloodlines mattered, where secrets had the power to reshape lives, and by opening this door, she might have invited the past to step inside once more. But even with that awareness, she did not regret her choice, because for the first time since learning about her own biological father, she felt as though she was doing more than surviving the truth. She was transforming it into something meaningful, something hopeful, and as the sun dipped lower over Los Angeles, casting long shadows across the design floor, Steffi whispered to herself that sometimes family wasn't just about where you came from, but about who believed in you when the truth finally came out, and though she had no idea how explosive Dylan's story would become, no idea how Jack's name would soon ripple through the building like thunder, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. This decision would change all of their lives forever. The following days only deepened that sense of inevitability, because Dylan didn't merely blend into Forrester Creations, he ignited something there, his designs raw yet fearless, carrying an edge that caught Steffi's attention in every review, and each time she praised his work she saw in his eyes the same fragile disbelief she once carried, the silent question of whether this acceptance was real or just another illusion waiting to shatter. And that recognition forged an unspoken bond between them, one that unsettled Brooke when she observed their dynamic, because Brooke knew better than anyone how dangerous emotional investments could become in this family, how easily compassion could blur into entanglement, and when she warned Steffi that personal history should never dictate professional decisions, Steffi didn't bristle, she simply answered that ignoring personal history was what had broken so many of them in the first place, and Brooke, hearing echoes of her own past mistakes in those words, had no rebuttal, only a quiet fear that this young man's presence would stir truths that had been buried for a reason. Meanwhile, Finn found himself inexplicably drawn to Dylan's workspace, asking questions under the guise of friendly curiosity, studying his sketches, noticing how their hands moved in eerily similar ways, how they both favored bold lines and asymmetrical balance, and though he brushed it off as coincidence, a persistent ache settled in his chest, as if something unfinished was circling him, demanding recognition, and that night he dreamed of Jack, of unanswered questions, of a boy standing in shadow with his face blurred, and he woke with a start, unable to shake the feeling that the past was reaching for him through Dylan's presence, while Dylan, on his own, wrestled with the truth he carried, the name Jack Finnegan echoing in his mind every time he saw Finn walk by. Every time Steffi smiled at him with that mixture of authority and understanding. Because he hadn't come to Forrester to expose anyone, he only wanted a chance, yet the secret burned, threatening to surface in moments of vulnerability, especially when Steffi shared fragments of her own story with him, speaking of the shock of learning about her biological father, of the anger and confusion and eventual strength that followed, and as he listened, Dylan realized she wasn't just his boss. She was a living map of what his future might become if he chose courage over fear, and that realization both steadied and terrified him, because if he followed that path, the truth would eventually demand daylight. Ridge sensed the tension building like static in the air, watching Finn and Dylan cross paths, noticing Steffi's protective instincts flaring, recognizing the familiar rhythm of a secret preparing to erupt, and though he tried to convince himself he was overreacting, his own history whispered warnings, reminding him that in this family, blood always surfaced, no matter how deeply it was buried, and he began to question whether Steffi's empathy was blinding her to the risks, whether in trying to heal her own wounds she might be opening new ones for everyone else. Yet even as doubt crept in, he couldn't deny the pride he felt seeing her lead with heart rather than fear, because that was something he himself had struggled to do. The turning point came quietly, without fanfare, during a late evening at the office when only a handful of lights remained on and Dylan, exhausted and overwhelmed, finally cracked, telling Steffy that he didn't know how long he could keep pretending everything was normal, that every day he walked these halls he felt as though he was standing on a fault line, and when she gently asked why, he hesitated, eyes glistening, and whispered that